So we'll go ahead and get started for the evening. I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 6 members here with 4 absent. So I also need somebody to take notes tonight, as Ms. Baker is the normal secretary who is not here this evening. So if anybody wants to take, who can I get to do that? Mr. Jewell? Who are we pointing at? Oh, somebody's been drafted over there. Thank you very much, Amy. The minutes have been distributed, I do believe, from the September 14th meeting. Are there any additions or subtractions that need to be made to the minutes? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes from September the 14th. Mr. Jewell makes the motion. Mr. Dickey makes the second. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed, the like sign. The motion does carry and the minutes are approved. This evening's agenda has the company Burris Thompson and Associates are going to be here tonight to talk about the compensation study that has been performed and the benefits review. Steve Thompson and Beth Thompson are here with us this evening. I would like to, in just a second, turn the floor over to them, but I don't want them to lose their GPS because some of the things you're going to talk about tonight would affect us in personnel, but other things that were going to be discussed in this wage policy or this compensation study will go to budget and finance as well. Now, a lot of the people that are on this committee, as you talk to tonight, they are commissioners that would be part of the full body eventually that would, discuss this matter more in depth, but you may get questions tonight as to how it affects policies. You may get questions tonight how it affects budgetary means, but more than likely there will be another meeting in addition to this one because we're just one of the committees. But if it affects anything having to do with monies or increases in compensation, those things that would affect our overall budget, we would need to also bring in the budget and finance. But if that being said, I'd like to at this moment notice that everybody probably has one of these in their packet from before, so we can probably follow along a little bit tonight as they make their presentation. And as he starts, I didn't say this at the beginning of the meeting, I probably need to say this now. If you would, please put your phones on mute for the evening so we are not interrupted due to somebody's phone. But at this moment, Steve, I'm going to let you have the floor and we can go ahead and start to discuss the compensation studies before us. Okay, since he doesn't have a copy, does anybody have an extra? I think that was in the packet from last night, right? That's what, okay. All right.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Hey, glad to be here tonight. Beth and I are pleased to present the findings of our compensation study. I'm quick to point out that this is not necessarily a done product, a finished product. Whenever we do these studies, there's always some tweaking going on and some adjustments until the final implementation, which is whenever y'all decide, but until the last paycheck is cut that incorporates any pay changes. And up until that point, a lot of things, not a lot of things, but some things are subject to change. Most due to feedback from personnel, from city and county departments, elected officials. I'll just go through the methodology of the study pretty quickly here. I'll try to go slow so we can follow along. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in. It's probably best to jump in right away rather than try to remember them at the end. I'd encourage you to ask questions as we go. And then we'll have time for some additional questions and answers at the end. So if you turn to page 3 of the little handout there, labeled introduction, we identify at the top some pay study objectives. I guess it can be boiled down to largely 2. to make sure that the county, city government is competitive going forward and able to attract and retain qualified employees to serve citizens. And secondarily, along with that, I guess, is to make sure employees are compensated fairly for the work being performed. Many times when we do these studies, it becomes apparent that an employee or two, or sometimes more, are assigned a job title that bears no resemblance to what they actually do, or maybe bears some resemblance, but things have changed a lot since they were maybe initially hired. Often this is because an employee who is a go-getter, strong performer, they keep getting more and more work. People give them more things to do because they do it well. And so we wake up a year or two later, and lo and behold, this person's doing a whole lot different job than they were hired to do. So sometimes that happens. We want to make sure that all employees are being compensated for the work that they're actually performing. So the approach we take is pretty much a market-driven approach. Jobs are valued like they're valued in the marketplace. Some firms, some consulting firms that do these studies undertake some sort of job content evaluation, a subjective evaluation of knowledge requirements, problem solving, accountability, working conditions, those kinds of things. Points are assigned to jobs. They're arrayed from high to low in terms of points. And then that's salary survey data is overlaid against that analysis, and you come up with a pay plan. I've done those. They're slowly falling out of favor in the private sector as well as the public sector. So the approach we take is, like I say, market driven. We don't do any of that kind of thing per se. It's more of a market driven. Jobs are valued like they're valued in the marketplace based on the salary survey data. So we have two sources of data that we look at. The public sector, you'll see in the middle of page 3 there, under the salary market data, public sector data, we have 11 counties and cities that were identified as good benchmarks for the study. These seem to be good labor market competitors, and some are a little further away, but were good matches in terms of demographics. So this seems a good representation of the labor market facing Hartsville-Trousdale County. We also have a second database that's comprised of data from general business and industry. I would venture to say that most employees that leave employment of government here don't go to another city or county government. Some do, but many don't. So you're competing with general business and industry for a lot of the same people. So for each job, then we have pretty much 2 data points, one public sector data point and one private sector data point. The only exception to that really being certified public safety, fire and police, sheriff's department. Those kinds of jobs are not included in the general business and industry database. So in that case, we're relying solely on the public sector data for certified public safety positions. This does not include EMS. EMS is represented in the general business and industry database. All data were projected forward to July 1, 2021. So we're already kind of lagging a little bit here. My recommendation would be, if you're looking at implementing this next year, you might want to project things forward to July 1, 2022, which would amount to a slight adjustment to things. But as of the publication of this, a release of this study, everything was projected to July 1, 2021. All right, so for each job I mentioned, we developed determined a market rate, which is the average of the public sector number and the private sector number. The only exception to that being for department heads, we made some attempt to take into account population. To the extent population is a good proxy for the complexity of department head level jobs, we determined whether or not salary was in fact related to population. And for some of these positions, it was. In that case, we used a number that was statistically predicted based on the population of Hartsville-Trousdale County government. But for all the other jobs, it was the average of the public sector and private sector numbers. Should be noted that this market rate represents somebody with probably 5 to 7 years in the position. So most employers will hire people below the market rate, typically as much as 15% below that. Market rate is a typical starting rate of pay in many formal pay plans. Most employers will allow pay to progress beyond the market rate to reward service, tenure, maybe performance. Traditionally, pay plans have allowed pay to progress as much as 20% above the market rate. So you often have a pay range, market rate minus 15% plus 20%. Pretty common pay structure design. As I mentioned, we looked at job titles and the job functions themselves. For a few departments, job titles seem to be not entirely representative of the work being performed. In a couple instances, we felt you could break a broad job classification into several different levels to better reflect the differences in job complexity, skill levels, et cetera, amongst employees. So we did look at that. And we looked at when we compared overall employee salaries to the market. On the average, salaries were about 89% of the market rates for their jobs, so about 11% below market. Now, for some new hires, recent hires, that's okay. If it's in the range of 85 to 90% of market, that's probably okay. If we're much less than 80% of market, we're probably you could consider those to be underpaid. If you look at that chart, that pie chart in the middle of page 4 there, you can see that in fact 33% were less than 85% of market. 37% were between 85 and 95, and 30% were greater than 95% of market. So, overall, not in too bad a shape, but you do have some employees that are probably low paid relative to the tenure in their positions. Any questions so far?
Yeah, so the 33% tile, is there one particular area that weighed heavier in this classification? And then likewise for the 30% that's greater than the 95, was there an area or a department that weighed heavier?
If you turn to page 7, if you look at the third column from the left, this is by department. You'll see salary market index, the third column from the left. If you scan that, you'll see that ambulance, EMA was kind of low, animal shelter, jail, library, planning and zoning kind of sticks out. Veteran services, there's a handful of departments that do stick out as quite a bit below 85%, or a little bit below 85%, some further than others. Juvenile services was the highest at 112%. Also look at that column right to the left of that average tenure in job. You'll see that some of these with higher percentages have greater tenure in job. Juvenile services is one of those. Employees in that department have longer service than many of the other departments. So that in part would explain why their salaries are a little higher.
Where you have these departments like county clerk or county mayor, is that including the elected official?
No.
So that is just the staff that's
Right.
in those offices.
The elected officials are not part of the study at all.
Okay. Are supervisors in the non-elected offices included, such as ambulance? Or,
Yes.
Or they are
Yes.
included in this?
Yeah.
Okay. So the only thing that's not is the elected official.
Correct. Other questions?
Did you look to see if the county commission is paid enough?
No.
No.
We can do that. I don't have a lot of good data on that. We did do a couple studies of those in the past, and it's all over the board. It really is. But we do get asked that once in a while. We haven't looked at that for a number of years, though. It'd be kind of interesting to see, I guess. Anything else? Other questions at this point? Okay. So if we turn to page 5, here's our recommendations. First of all, job classifications in ambulance, EMS, jail, water and sewer. We're recommending some new job classifications. So on page 5, you'll see the current job title and the recommended new job classifications. So paramedic, we break that out into paramedic and shift supervisor, battalion chief. Those weren't really distinguished prior in the prior pay plan. In the jail, we're recommending 2 levels of corrections officer. In water and sewer, field tech, there's a broad array of skills and responsibilities represented currently in that field tech job classification. And we felt you could break it out into 3 levels of field tech, crew chief 1 and 2, water plant operator, wastewater plant operator, and could more closely match pay to job responsibilities and employee skill levels if we did that. Operator, we could break out into chief water plant and wastewater plant superintendent, sewer plant, wastewater plant operator, and lastly, the superintendent overall. We're recommending you call that the water and sewer director, a more commonly used title in the public sector.
It appears the vast majority of the adjustments or additions of different descriptors lays in the field of the water and sewer department. Tommy, have you had a chance to look at this? Do you know what's your reception on these different classifications?
We did talk to Tommy, we did talk to Tommy about that, and you want to talk?
We worked on this with them. Of course, all of our employees are big licensed, certified to do their jobs. Some of them have different skill sets and handle more, just have different type of skill sets.
Yeah, I sat with these guys and we went over these and looked at them. We looked at, try to look at each individual employee a little bit and see their different skill sets. And, we can be certified in the distribution system and they can be licensed to do that. Water plant, sewer plant, collection system is part of the sewer system, just like the distribution is for water. That's what the collection system is for is similar to distribution for water services. So, and some employees have, they may be a little more advanced, can be trusted with more advanced type skills like electrical, or we have advanced SCADA systems. Some of them are really good with those things, and that takes skill sets that some other employees just don't have. So that's why we looked at breaking these down into different groups.
So your plans are to possibly implement these new classifications in your department? Is that your thought?
Yeah, as we work together, looking at these all these other employees, as we looked at their job classifications and some of their skill sets, we come up with this type of, this is how we kind of set it up.
Now, would that be something that would reach out further to the water board, or is that a combination of water board and us, or is this just us, or how would that look?
Well, we paid to be a part of this. We wasn't included. So we paid to be a part of this study.
But as far as, you mean as far as deciding these job classifications, I think it would be whatever he recommends, and the board, I'm sure, would go along with it. I feel like they would, so.
And it
It's,
can,
it's more operations than it is anything else, and
Yeah.
so he's kind of that. I do have a question on jail. It says corrections officer 1 and corrections officer 1. That's supposed to be corrections officer 2.
Yes. Sorry.
I didn't grab nothing here.
Oh, okay.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, the two levels of corrections officer. The first is kind of an entry-level position, and the second one would be a certified, not post-certified like a sheriff's deputy, but a certified corrections officer. There's a different certification there, as you might be aware. So that'd be the primary distinction.
So there's really not a lot of jobs that need reclassifying.
As far as new titles, not a lot, no. I just like was observed mostly in water and sewer, but not overall, not a lot.
I noticed ambulance and EMS, I'm a little familiar with some of that. Matt, Mr. Beatty is here, the shift supervisor and battalion chief. We already have those classifications, do we not?
Yes, yeah, they exist currently.
Okay.
The specific job description itself may have been kind of up in the air as a change. That position exists already.
Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, I do, Bill.
Yes, sir.
I don't see anything on here with Cliffs people.
With what?
Cliffs of South?
So
Okay.
Vicky, you just push yours, Vicky.
He asked if there was any, he didn't see any Cliffs Department, Cliffs Lee's department, but there were no recommendations for job classifications for his department.
okay, if you look at the bottom of page 15, where it's labeled to create a pay plan, what we're suggesting is a 15 grade pay plan. Each pay grade has 16 pay steps. Each step represents a 2.35% increase. These steps would typically be annual steps. Sometimes we do see pay plans where the last couple are biannual, but more often than not, all the steps are considered to be annual steps. So somebody meeting minimal qualifications, minimal performance expectations would normally progress to the next step each year. People who did not meet minimal performance expectations would not move a step. So if you look at attachment 1,
Is 15 pay grades, 16 steps, is that typical?
I'd say right now it's pretty typical. We've been doing this since 1994. We started out with steps that were 4 or 5% each, and we might have 10. Now the steps are typically between 2 and 3%, and we often have 15, 16, 17, 18. Remember, most employers allow pay to progress around 15 to 20% above the market rate. So that if you're talking 2% steps, do the math, you're talking 15 steps or so. So yeah, this is pretty typical.
Now, are these steps, what are they based upon? Are they based upon longevity? Are they based upon, are you getting to that part? Maybe I'm getting ahead of
So
myself.
I'll kind of explain how this works here. If you turn to pay exhibit 1, which is on at the end there, exhibit 1, it's the proposed pay grade and step schedule. You can see horizontally or vertically, we've got the 15 pay grades. Then horizontally, we have the 16 pay steps. So each job was assigned to the pay grade where step 8 most closely matches the job's market rate. So I'll repeat that. So we took each job, looked at its market rate, found the step 8 that's closest to it. That's the pay grade the job was assigned to. So for example, if you had a job that had a market rate of $19.15 an hour, well, the closest step 8 is the one for step 7. So the job would go in grade 7. So all jobs were assigned the pay grade based on that approach. You'll note that after we did this and modeled employee salaries against this, and typically people went into the step closest to their current rate of pay, but not less. So we took a pretty conservative approach in doing that. After we did this with all the employees, we determined that we had quite a few who were getting pretty significant increases to get to step 1. So we added this phase-in step right below step 1 there to kind of allow you to ease into this a little bit. So there are a fair number of employees going to that phase-in step, pretty significant increase to do that. Everybody else is going to the step closest to the current rate of pay, but not less. The average of all these increases to do that was about $1,869. And you look at that chart in the middle of page 6, employee salary adjustments. So each person is going to go to that phase-in step or step 1 through 16, whatever their current salary is closest to. And then we're also recommending, on top of that, a general increase. All employees would move 1 step. That would be a general increase, call it market adjustment. I prefer not to call it cost of living, but everybody would move 1 step. That would be a general increase. So the average of all these increases is about $1,869. If you look at that chart in the middle of page 6, you can see that about 28% would get less than $1,100. 47% would get between $1,100 and $1,900. And about 29% would get more than $1,900. One of the things about one of the characteristics of a step-based plan, when you first put it into place, you have somewhat inequitable results. Somebody could be 3 cents below the step that's closest to their current rate of pay, so they're going to get a 3 cent an hour increase. Somebody could be $1.50 from the closest step in the pay plan. And so they're going to get $1.50 an hour. So you're going to have an inequitable situation there. That's one of the downsides of the step plan when you first implement it. Of course, going forward, everybody moves 1 step, everybody gets the same increase. But when you first put one in place, you have some inequity there. Somewhat mitigated by the fact that we're going to put everybody into the closest step and then move everybody 1 step. So everybody's going to get at least the 2.35 and some change. Some will get more than that. So any questions on how we got people into the steps?
Maybe premature on it. Where did the 2.35 figure come in? Why not 2? Why not 1.5? Why not 4? Where did that 2.35?
So we played around with different steps figures and came upon 2.35 as seemed to fit and yield total increased dollars that were affordable and yet allowed for significant enough increases between the steps. But frankly, we could have 2, we could have 3. There's not a whole lot of science behind that. It's kind of a little subjectivity.
So the step schedule is probably more important than that percentage is?
Yeah, I would say. In addition, what I usually tell my clients is that each year you need to monitor what's going on in the market. So if employers in general are granting 3% increases on the average, it would probably be prudent that you somewhat match that. So if you have 2.35%, you would add 0.65% to that to get close to the 3. If you did that, then you'd be mirroring what's going on in the marketplace and would sort of keep pace. Now, some years you might not be able to do that if dollars are tight. Maybe you can only do the 2.35. That's fine. There may be some years where you're flush with money and you want to add to make it 3.5%. You could do that. But from an employer standpoint, you probably want to mirror what's going on in the marketplace fairly close. You don't have to match it exactly, but you know, if the market's moving at 3% and you're moving at 1.5%, you're going to fall behind. If the market's moving at 3 and you're at 2.75, you're probably good enough. But I think you kind of have to, as an elected body, you'd have to monitor what's going on and make sure you don't fall behind. That's one of the faults that happens with pay plans in the public sector is they oftentimes are not kept up to date. And so over a period of time, what was once a competitive pay plan becomes non-competitive, especially at the lower end. And for new higher rates of pay, that sort of thing is where the problem crops up first. And then we get called in again to help fix it. So my message is this would position you pretty competitively going forward. This phase in step should go away at some point pretty quickly, and you'd have the 16 steps. And if you periodically adjust those steps, 1.5% here and there, 2%, you know, you should keep up with the market and be in good shape going forward. But this is not something you can put in place and leave there for 8 years and expect to be competitive in year 8. People who've been with you 8 years will, but your newer folks are going to be starting out a lot lower, and your recent hires will be pretty low relative to market.
So 16 years you top out. Somebody that's at 20 and 25 and 30, they're still making what somebody at 16 makes.
Yes. Now, remember that the plan is adjusted periodically. I suggest every 2 or 3 years. So it's a moving target. So somebody starting at step 1, it's going to take them more than 16 years to reach step 16, whenever that is. But yes, that is the short answer is yes.
So you're saying the steps are not necessarily in years?
They are, yeah, they are.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in 16 years, you've topped out. 15 years.
Yep, unless, and some employers will do this, they'll add a step. You know, one way to adjust the pay plan is to drop a step 1 and add one at the top. Sometimes you'll do that. It's not ideal because employees perceive that they're running in place. I'm in step 3, I get a step increase. Oh, but now that's step 3. You know, so they get the increase, but they're not getting ground. So most often you apply a percentage to the steps, in which case, yeah, it would be 16 years to get to this top step. Now, we do recommend that in lieu of an increase, in lieu of a step increase, we recommend a lump sum payment for people who are topped out. That's pretty common practice. The employee's pay doesn't compound.
Is that typically like a longevity bonus, or?
It's usually separate from that. If you have a longevity plan that pays $100 per year after 5 years for service, that's usually a separate thing. This is just a lump sum in lieu of a step increase. Because if I'm topped out, you know, why should I come to work? And well, if there's nothing at all on the line, you know, I may not be as motivated as if I were. Well, if that 2.3, in this case, 2.35% bonus is on the line, then I have some skin in the game, so to speak, to continue to perform at an acceptable level. So yeah, we usually recommend that.
Is that addressed in here?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, I missed it.
It should be in here, yeah. Maybe it's a detail that's not in here, but yes.
Quick question. So how do you feel that this step schedule works with reward for performance?
So pay for performance can be implemented with a step-based plan. You're limited. Your choices probably are going to be 0, no step, 1 step, or 2 steps. That's probably what your choices are going to be. So you could implement merit pay on that basis. Most employers that have merit pay have pay ranges to allow you a little bit more flexibility. So you could do 0%, you could do 1%, you could do 3%, you could do 4%, you could spread it out a little bit more. So that's.
So I was thinking about that because earlier here in the handbook, we've been talking about we want to move towards, more paying for performance. Right?
Yeah,
And so if you've got a department that's got multiple proposed grades that works in that department, and then every year, everybody just moves up a step, there's no way really to reward for performance. But if you went off of the schedule of a 2.3, let's just say if it's 2.35% budget for that year's merit increases, then you could have somebody getting 2%, somebody getting a 4%, but the department averages out to whatever the budget is set for that year for pay raises.
so we usually recommend if you're really moving to pay for performance, which is, as you know, a big step, can't be done overnight. But if that is if that's the end goal and you really want to get there, we usually recommend implementing a pay range based pay plan instead, because it removes some of the limitations you'll run into trying to implement merit pay with a step-based plan. That's a good point. And we've done those. I mean, I would say we do a survey. We're doing another survey right now. We do it every 2 years. We had 75 participants last time, and I'll say, I think about 55% of city and county governments in Tennessee have pay ranges, and about 45% have pay steps. So the trend slowly but surely is towards pay ranges, just because it gives you more flexibility, not only with regard to merit pay, but as far as new hires, transfers, demotions, promotions, all that stuff is a lot easier to maintain internal equity if you have pay ranges as opposed to steps. Steps just kind of makes it a little difficult. You almost have to do certain things you don't want to do because you have steps you have to land on, whereas if you have ranges, you have more flexibility to manage pay that usually results in more equitable outcomes. Most of the problem with step-based plans comes into play when you try to adjust them. So let's say you put this in place 2 years out, you say, all right, we're going to adjust the pay plan. Well, let's say you adjust all the steps 2%. Well, now you're looking at 4.35% budget hit that year. That's pretty significant. If you had a pay range-based approach, you can set that budget wherever the heck you want, and you're not following anything up. So that's another reason we tend to suggest pay range-based systems if they fit. The cultures in city and county government are such that most employees and many supervisors like these step-based plans because, I'll be frank, they believe that you folks are more likely to grant increases if it's on paper in front of you like this than if you just have a range and you have to set a budget. So the feeling is that this step-based approach instills a little bit more discipline amongst the elected officials, and they're going to do right by us employees. Whereas the pay range-based approach, they think all bets are off. We're at the mercy of the elected officials, and sometimes, frankly, the trust isn't there. So when we do, and we did a focus group here with Trousdale, Huntsville County government employees, and there was some discussion of pay ranges and pay steps. We talked to department heads about that too. I should have mentioned at the onset that we did talk to each individual department head when we first started this process to go over their jobs and their organizations. We talked about pay plan design, what kind of features they like, dislike, and some were in favor of step-based plans, some favored pay range-based approaches. On balance, we're suggesting right now that the pay step approach seems to fit best in terms of what employees expect, what department heads, elected officials expect. But it was not unanimous. And, it sounds like you're having some discussions about merit pay and implications for what kind of pay plan design would best support that. This can be easily modified into a step-based plan or into a pay range-based plan. You know, at a minimum, you just say the phase-in step is the minimum and the step 16 is the max, and calculate a midpoint in between. So it's pretty easy to move to a pay plan that's pay range-based, if you wish.
Mr. Dickey.
I have a question. When would this plan go in effect? When this plan would go in effect?
I think in talking to the mayor, he's thinking July 1, 2022. I guess he's got this bonus thing related to the payroll processing switchover that people are going to get an extra paycheck. Is that right? Is that, if I remember correctly? So the thought was it's going to pretty well take care of folks this year, and that this would be implemented sometime in 2022. I don't know that that's been determined exactly.
Okay, suppose it started in January. So if I got hired in January, I start off the step, phase one, phase in step, and then I'm gonna make $8.50.
If your job is in pay grade 1, there aren't a lot of jobs in pay grade 1. So it depends what grade your job is in. But remember, each job is assigned to the pay grade for which step 8 most closely matches the market rate for the job. So if you look at exhibit 2, this shows all the jobs, the pay grade assignments, and the steps associated with those pay grades. You'll see the market rate is listed on there too. So just kind of go through this from left to right. If you've got exhibit 2 in front of you. Don't have exhibit 2? Okay.
Why is step 8 in orange?
The small number in between there, that's the demarcation line, if you will, between two pay grades. So if you look at grades 10 and 11, that small number is 2853, that orange number. So jobs with market rates above 2853 would go in grade 11 or higher. Jobs with market rates below 2853 would go in grade 10 or below. Find the step that's closest to the current, to their.
Okay. I
the
don't
step eight.
think, why did we start at $8.30 an hour on step 1? I don't think we had passed an ordinance 2 years ago not to pay anyone a starting salary under $10 an hour. Did that go out the window somewhere?
No. We don't have any jobs in grade 1. That's kind of in there just as a holding place in case you have some temporaries or clerks that you want to use that grade for. Step 2, grade 2 starts at 927, but if you're talking implementing the $10 an hour, what I would do is delete steps below step 4 and start out at 10 or 1018, whatever you're 1018 in the case here. So no, this does not eliminate that.
Amy, did you?
Just to kind of interject here, the part-time employees are also paid off of the scale, and the $10 an hour that you're referring to applies only to full-time.
Okay.
We're not gonna see an exhibit 2.
So this is.
We're not gonna see an
proposed for
exhibit
part-time
2.
as well as full-time? I thought this was just to be full-time employees.
When you say exhibit 2, I'm not sure I understand.
This gentleman's talking that we're supposed to be looking at exhibit 2 right now.
Exhibit 2 is not included in the packets.
Well, I'd like to see an exhibit 2.
Historically, we have been in a system where during the budget times, the different departments would create their budgets for the upcoming year. And they would present that to the Budget and Finance Committee, which was pretty much composed of commissioners. And then if there were increases to be requested, it was at that time, and it was usually either an across the board percentage raise, or in one case here recently, I think we just gave like a 50-cent raise at the end of the day. And so those are kind of toggled during that time. Is there any information that you all were asked to perform that might go back in time and kind of historically look at the raises that we have given as a county, say in the last 5 years or in the last 7 years, or go back as far as even 10 years back and kind of see how we compared in terms of our steps along the way as what we have historically performed in terms of pay increases across the board, because that's what we have been traditionally doing. And then there's one more thing I was going to add to this. You know, our school systems is not listed in here. And I guess they were just left out for some reason, but as a former public school teacher, states give increases in percentages across the board from time to time, and then locals have the option to do it as well. And the last time we did that was 7 or 8 years ago, where we had a local match. And before then, it was 19 years ago that we had done that. Now, I don't know, I guess I got a question as a former teacher. Why would we leave the educational system out of this in terms of a local thought process? I'm just curious.
That's right. Yeah, we were not told to include the school system. That's a bigger project. We do that. We're doing Montgomery County, or I did Montgomery County schools. We do an update for them every year. I'm doing a big study for Hamilton County schools, and we're doing one for Murray County schools right now too. So we do those, but we were not directed to do that.
That makes sense. I just wanted to interject that that's not in this process, and that you probably were not asked of that.
Did this include the highway department?
No, we were told to exclude them too,
Okay.
which often happens in county government, by the way. The highway departments, if you talk to county executives across the state, the highway departments are kind of out there. they're a different animal.
Out there, but every time we give everybody else a raise, they want one too.
Yeah. So
Same thing with the schools, and we give the county employees one. The non-certified personnel, even though the majority of their pay comes from the state, they're saying we're not getting anything from the state because they're non-certified personnel, and they're trying to mirror what we do here.
mhm,
So it does affect them whether they were included in it or not.
yeah.
So I guess back to my question.
So yeah, to answer your very first question about looking back and historically at the pay increases that you granted, no, we did not look at them year by year going back. I guess the best answer I have to that question is, where are you now? I almost, from my perspective, don't care how you got here. We're 89% of market overall. So some employees are paid appropriately, but a fair number are kind of low. Okay. Other questions?
A question I have, how did the full-time will fit in the scale? Or just only for the new employee? In other words, if I get hired in January, would that just be for the new people that coming in, not the present employee?
This would apply to everybody, yeah. So, somebody meeting minimal qualifications for the job would come in at either the phase-in step temporarily or step one. Somebody who has more than the minimal qualifications, a lot of experience, a lot of skills, certifications, training, whatever. Usually they can be brought in In some, again, it's a policy kind of a thing, but as high as step 8, perhaps. You know, department heads, elected officials need to be careful they don't bring in new hires that leapfrog current employees that have the same or similar backgrounds. So that's always a danger. You got to avoid that. But this plan would allow flexibility tied into the policy that you could hire new hires as high as step 8. You all can decide what that is. It step 8, is it step 7? You all get to decide that. We usually recommend step 8, you know, the market step, so to speak. But that's kind of a philosophy that you all have to decide on.
How do we decide what employee designation starts at what proposed grade? Have y'all looked at that and give us a proposed grade?
Yes. So
for
each
job description?
each employee has a job title.
Is that in here? Did I miss it?
No, that's the exhibit 2 you don't have. So each employee has been assigned a job title. Each employee has a job title. Each job is assigned to be in one of the pay grades, either 1, 2, 3, or 1 through 16. Okay. All right. So then what step they go in, Yeah. We've already determined the grade because that's the title of the job. The step is we're putting people in merely based on their current rate of pay. So they're going to the step closest to the current rate of pay,
You
but not
say that
less.
was decided. When, who, how was that decided? By you, by the mayor, by?
That's just, like I said, this is not a done deal yet. You know, this is our first recommendation, conservative. This is the least we would do. We would often suggest you do more. In fact, we're suggesting you do move an extra step. So everybody goes into the step closest to the current rate of pay, but not less, and then moves 1 step. Very conservative approach. Sometimes, actually quite frequently, we'll take this opportunity to look at kind of what you're going back to, historically what's been going on in terms of pay increases. We'll look at the relationship between tenure in job and salary and determine where the employee should, quote unquote, be based on time and job. So you might have a formula that says if an employee's been in their job for 7 years, they should be at least at step 3. And if they're not at step 3, we would move them to that step. So you can create a set of formulas like that, if you will, as aggressive or as not aggressive as you want, as the budget can afford. That gets pretty expensive pretty quickly to the extent you try to catch up like that. Depends on where employees' current pay rates fall relative to their job tenure and the steps. We haven't analyzed that completely, but we can do that.
So if we have a job classification that says it's class, say, class 6. And
grade
the
6,
person's been in their job for 5 years. Are we going to start them at step 5 at class 6? Or are they going to start at step 1? Everybody's starting at step 1.
No, they would go into the step closest to the current rate of pay, but not less. They're not, nobody's losing anything.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, if directed, and not sure, we'll have to kind of look at the budget and see how much was in there for this, but we can and often do analyze just what you're saying. So if this person's been in the job 5 years, and let's say the closest step is step 1, well, that's probably not right. So can we get them all the way to step 5? There's a number of dollars associated with that. Can we get them to step 3? What can we do to get them closer to where they, quote unquote, should be? And those are pretty big quotations, by the way. So
Is there anybody going backwards?
no, nobody loses anything.
Why not? If we can move them all up, why can't we move some back that are overpaid?
Nobody's over step 16, as I recall. Beth, do you remember any? No, nobody's over step 16. So nobody's above the steps. Even if they were, that's all your choice, basically. We would typically recommend just freezing those salaries until the steps catch up. But
I thought in the original data, you were saying that there were some people that were overpaid. You said there were some underpaid and some that were overpaid.
no, I didn't say that. I said there were some that were over the market rate. If you look at step. Well, remember, the market rate is step 8. The market rate is step 8. And we're saying most employers allow pay to progress beyond the market rate to reward service, tenure, maybe performance. So market rate plus 15%, 20%, pretty common. So I would suggest that if you have employees who are more than 120% of step 8, they're probably overpaid. Don't have any of those.
So do we have people based on market that are paid more than market, or is everyone we have across the board under market?
No, there are some people who are above, who would go in at steps 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I think there's one going into 15, maybe. That's about it. So they are above market, but I would say they're fairly paid based on the time and job. That those are probably long-term employees, and they're probably paid fairly based on their time and job in steps 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15.
And I may be going back to what the mayor had made that statement, that we would see that some were vastly underpaid and some were overpaid. I'm not seeing that. That's why I was questioning that.
Mr. Davis.
I would not characterize anybody as being overpaid.
So just to clarify, step 8 for all proposed grades is what you would consider 100% of market rate. Step 16 could be 120% over market rate.
Yeah, it's 2.35 times.
Exactly.
Whatever, yeah, it's
Right, and that's normal.
yeah.
Now, an implementation, an entity, or I'm just going to say a municipality or government that has implemented this step process. And then there's a figure that comes along with that, a dollar figure,
Right.
to get caught up to speed, so to speak. But then going forward, as these steps are implemented, does that, those that have gone this route, does that take the ability of a local governing body's ability to manage the dollar figure? Does it take it away from that entity? Like a local government will say, look, we can't afford this? How does that work?
No. So usually if there's an ordinance drafted to support the pay plan, and sometimes there isn't, but, or if there's a pay policy, whatever approach you take, no. If their dollars are not there to fund a step increase, you don't do it. Similarly, if you had a pay range based approach, if the dollars aren't there, you maybe budget 0% for that year. The advantage with a pay range based approach is if you could eke out 1%, you could do that. Whereas with a step based plan, it's almost you got to do a step or not.
So if you skipped a year because you didn't have the money, you're going to be that amount behind. So you're going to have to play catch up from that point forward.
Eventually, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to play catch
So
up.
basically, if we implement this based on this 2.35, we're pretty much anticipating that our pay amount in dollars is going to be, if it's $100,000, it's going to be $102,000. The next year, it's going to be.
Right.
So we know that we're going to have more money every year, whether we have the money or not. I'm not sure we could get by with the 2.35% increase on property taxes every year, but I guess we could try that. Don't know.
Yeah, it's if in Tennessee, you have the Brentwoods and the Spring Hills and the Franklins they're growing like great guns. They can do this. Some of the counties that are in smaller cities that are further out that are not experiencing growth, it's a little tough. There's no hiding that fact. But from an employee standpoint, if I'm looking to choose to work for you folks or somebody else, I don't care. I don't care about that. I want to know what I'm going to get paid. So our message to you is if you want to continue to attract and retain or even improve your ability to attract and retain qualified employees, this is probably the minimal kind of thing I would do. You could go more than this, but I think this would set you up fairly well to be competitive going forward.
Well, I think we all want that. It's just that we, not only do we do what we want to do or what we ought to do, sometimes we do what we have to do.
Right.
And we never know from one year to the next what the economy is going to be, what it's going to do, how it's going to affect us and our budget, what things are going to come up. But the problem with this is once we implement this, we're pretty much locked into this. And I'm okay with that, if that's what we feel like we need to do. I've said on more than one occasion that we need to take care of the people that work and take care of us as a county, and that I'm not going to be the one that balances the budget on the backs of the employees. But by the same token, I don't want the employees to bust the budget. So there's a fine line here, and that was one of my questions. Say you're 4 years into this and you're ready to implement step 5. Can you skip a year and next year implement to step 5? Or are you going to have to take it to step 6 to make up that lost ground? So if you're doing that, you're not really accomplishing anything.
Yeah,
There's a big disparity between grade 15 and grade 1. When you max out at step 16, step 1 has had a $3.70 increase over 15 years, and grade 15 has had a $17.25 increase over 15 years. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be different. It absolutely should be. I don't understand, for a county of our size and the limited number of jobs we have, why we have 15 grades. I don't see necessarily that we need 15 pay grades. Seems like it would be a little bit more simple and a little more equitable to have fewer of them, but maybe we have that many people spread across them now. It's just, I don't know.
yeah, that is one of the challenges we look at. Is one of the issues we look at is how many pay grades. I'm not one for having lots and lots of pay grades. In the public sector years ago, a pretty traditional approach was to have 5% between pay grades. You'd have 35 pay grades if that was the case. I think that's ridiculous. So I usually strive for 12 to 13% between grades. So step 8s are 12 to 13% between grades. And we ended up at 11.65. Close. To accommodate all the jobs and the different job levels, for example, what we talked about in water and sewer, field tech 1, 2, 3, et cetera, supervisors, we needed 16 pay grades to do that. You get less than 16 pay grades, you start to combine jobs that are different.
Commissioner Dickey.
I'll give you an example. Here at Postal Service, our pay grade as a carrier, we get paid PS5. But the other part is we have 26 steps. When you top out, that's all you get. So 15 grade, the pay grade is not that bad, But I'm just giving you an example. You're at Postal Service, they set your pay grade at PS5. That's all you get, and then you have 26 pay step. And when you
Steps
top
are
out,
probably
that's all you get.
smaller. I don't know what size the
My
pay
days
steps are,
in-
so.
All I have experience in this is in retail.
Mhm.
And typically, you're probably gonna have, I'd say 6 to 10 at most, including management. This just seemed like a lot of pay grades, a lot of.
Well, I used to be director of compensation for Dollar General. So we had, to accommodate Cal Turner, I think we had 25 pay grades. So, yeah, and in the store ranks, you had district manager and store manager, closer, And, you know, that was maybe 5 grades. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But once you throw in the management and administrative jobs and et cetera, you know, to accommodate at fair market rates, those jobs, you need more pay grades.
In the industry, what's typical in the industry, do you know?
For us, it's, we have 4 pay grades based off general labor throughout the plant. And then you have about 4 different levels of management. So maybe 8 to 10. Yeah. So like when I look at water and sewer, I know. You did have a current job that's classified as field tech. And then the new classifications is field tech 1, 2, 3, then a crew chief 1, 2. So I mean, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pay grades that you could move your folks into. I'm assuming.
And that pretty much covers.
Over here on the proposed grades.
Yeah, that pretty much covers the whole non-exempt workforce.
Right.
Yeah. And so, you know, to answer your question, how does it compare to business and industry? We would often have nine pay grades for non-exempt people. And then exempt people would go from 10 to 25. It depends on the size of the organization. Where does the CEO's pay, if it's in the pay plan, and often it is, where does that stack up? Or where do the VPs, directors of departments, where do those, so they have to be in the appropriate pay grades and then you filter in between. So there may be some jobs, you know, we've only got 1 job in grade 15, 2 and 12, 3 and 11, 5 and 10. So there's only 1 in 14. So there aren't a lot of jobs in those upper pay grades. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. All right, we kind of got off on different tangents here, but going back to the, I guess one concern that I think kind of here behind the scenes here is whether it's the catch-up thing or putting people in the pay plan based on their time and job, their tenure, that has not been done yet. All we did is put people in the step closest to their current rate of pay, whether that's a 5-year person going in at step 3 and a 15-year person going in step 4. You know, we didn't look at that. We have to look at the contract and see how much money we've got in there for that, but you don't have a lot of folks here, so it shouldn't be too tough. But we could come back and say, hey, if you wanted to do that, and we'd probably work with the mayor and come up with, you know, a ballpark dollar amount that we can kind of assume is reasonable. If you wanted to do that within this budgetary constraint, here's what that would look like. And this would, we could show you how much that would cost, and we'd show you where you end up, where the employees end up in terms of steps, and as a percent of market, where do they end up? We could do that. If you look at the last page on the report here, page 7, if you look at page 7, what we've just done here takes you from an overall market rate of about 88% to 94%. So when all said and done, with going to the step closest to their current rate of pay, moving 1 step, on the average, employees' salaries will be at 94% of market. That's pretty good. Some departments are a little bit lower than others. Often that's related to tenure. But overall, you're at 94%. So that's, you know, that's not too bad. We can improve on that a little bit if we did this tenure analysis, and it may not cost a whole lot. You may not need to move. We just did one for a town in West Tennessee, not as many employees as you folks have, but we did that analysis, and I think only a dozen or so employees got tenure-based adjustments to put them where they quote unquote, or at least closer to where they should be based on time and job. So without doing the analysis, it's hard to tell how big of a dollar figure we're talking and how many employees would be affected. It may not be a whole lot, But we could look at that.
Not want to go backwards here at all. I just, for us, the personnel committee and just moving forward and backing up to our last meeting, we're gonna have to clarify some of this a little bit because, you know, when I go back and I just look, what we thought we were gonna look to approve, right, was that Hartsville, Trousdale County believes that pay should be based on merit, will offer employees opportunity for achievement and salary increases through exceptional effort. And then also salary increases are based on performance and responsibility, not on seniority. They are not automatic, but are based on supervisory's evaluations of performance results in relation to performance expectations. So we can't approve that if we're looking at doing this, right? So we're gonna have to figure that out one way or the other. Just, I don't think we gotta solve that tonight, obviously, but just for us to remember.
Yeah, right now, if you're gonna do merit pay, you're gonna have zero. You can give the employee no step, one step, or probably two steps to stay within budget. That's your choice. You could do it that way, but it's not ideal. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure, I understand. Yes.
About a little bit, that sound is because two different mics are on at the same time, so
Okay.
you may have to hit yours off when they're,
Okay.
yeah. Mr. Dickey?
Let me give you an example. I'm in the military. I'm a water plant operator. I have 10 years. Now, when I come to this water department, with, here in Hartsville, how's he gonna qualify me, what step, what grade? Is it, hey, I'm gonna start at the bottom or I'm gonna start at a certain level?
Right now, we're proposing that you go into the step that's closest to your current rate of pay, but not less. You're not gonna lose anything. You could get as much as 2.35%, and then you're gonna move one step. Okay?
I just wanna clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right now, according to this, to implement this, we're looking at 235,000.
Yes. That's comprised, if you look at the bottom there, 85,000 to get some people to that phase-in step that are below it. And then for everybody else, we need another 48,000 to get everybody to the closest step. And then that general increase of one step is 101,842. So that total is 235,556, correct? And that moves you from 88% of market to 94% of market.
Question to Amy, have y'all looked at if we do this, we add this 235 to our current payroll, what it would take the following year to do the 2.3?
We haven't looked at that yet, no.
I don't believe we have actually put pen to paper to actually figure that out just yet. This is just a preliminary discussion of trying to get something in place.
Well, I think it's good for us to have the figures to know what it's going to take to implement it, but I think we're going to have a question from more than one person. Okay, if we do that this year and that's what it costs, what's it going to cost us next year? So it might be good to have just a baseball park figure based on that 2.3.
And I was kind of thinking about that, just sitting here listening to the discussion. I don't believe it's going to be 200,000 every single year. We're probably looking at more closely to a 20, 25,000, the next year, depending on who gets raises, who's still in that position. We have turnaround quite a bit. Currently, we have.
How much is our current budget roughly
For salaries?
for salaries?
Oh, I can't even guess at that at this moment.
100,000, 200,000, 50,000 ballpark.
I know a 2-week payroll runs us about 135.
Okay.
135,000.
Okay. So 2%, 2,600 times 52, be 12, 15, substantial.
So if you look at the general increase column on page 7, 101,000, that's the 2.35% for everybody currently employed. So that's what you would expect, close to that, a little bit more than that the next year, because it's going to compound. You're going to start from a higher starting point. But to answer your question, I'd say roughly around 100,000 for each year.
That's kind of what I was in my
Yeah.
mind putting it at. So 235 to implement it, and then 100 plus each year to stay with the 2.35 schedule.
And like you said, you're going to have people leave, so jobs are going to be vacant. You're going to bring in new people that aren't eligible for an increase. So that's probably the 101. It's probably that's
Yeah.
the high
I
end.
feel like our growth, if we can, if we sustain the current growth we have, we should have enough growth money in our budget to be able to accomplish that.
And, like I said, there's nothing that says you're obligated to do the steps. If the money's not there, you can't. Now, you're right, though. You're right to point out. that-
If we implement it and the people expect it, yes, we are obligated to do it.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
It's the old saying is hell to pay.
And you're right. The minute you start doing that, things start getting fouled up. So once in a while, once every 10 years, that's okay. But yeah, exactly.
The question I have, if it's 2.35, if that's going to be every year, who the revenue going to come from? Are we going to raise the property tax, or are we going to get it out of sales tax?
I don't know. What's the answer to that question? That's not my bailiwick.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The question is 2.35 to put a pay raise, whatever it is. Now, where's the revenue going to come from?
Chances are your revenue is going to come from your growth in your property taxes.
And you think the people going to like that?
I don't know what the community is going to think, but I know that a lot of them are related to county employees.
What have we done, my ignorance here, what have we done in the past, say, 5 years on average? Is it nothing? I heard you say nothing. Is that for real?
No.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what we
Good. Good enough, I'm done. Figured it out.
The way this is set up, once a year, there's a budget that is presented by the mayor's office to the commission, to the Budget and Finance Committee first. And then that's when the department heads come in to that committee and discuss what they have proposed to the mayor's budget that is to be proposed to the court. So it starts with the department heads discussing this with the mayor's office. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is where it starts. I'm just kind of giving you the groundwork. And then by charter, the mayor proposes the budget to the commission each year. So that's how the process has been in the past. So if somebody wanted to ask for an increase for their employees, then they would do that at that time. So if a court has decided not to give the increases, it may have been because nobody asked for a raise. Or then again, it could have been that they asked for a raise and then it didn't get past the mayor's office. I'm not saying that any of this, these are the ways that it happens. Traditionally, it's how it happens in each different department. From some of the commissioners' viewpoints, they like to do raises that were across the board, so one department didn't have favoritism over another. Things like that are the theories behind some of that. Dwight, 2 years ago, I think we were discussing percentage raise across the board, but at the end of the day, it ended up just being a certain figure. A certain dollar amount is what we landed on at the end of the day. So those things are really massaged during that time of the year in which the budget comes forward. But any budget that's presented to the commission has to come from the mayor's office by charter. And so that's why the departments go and they talk about it there first, and they bring the budget and finance, it passes budget and finance, then it goes to the full court to discuss at that point. And I think this last year, instead of doing an increase in percentage increase in pay, they got an extra pay period. And now I'm not sure what that percentage of an increase would be if you were to crunch the numbers that way. Amy, do you know what that would? Was it 2%? I was thinking it was 2%, but 2.5%. Okay. So you're, I mean, you know, that's what we have done the last 2 years. Now to go back any further, had to crunch the, have to look that up to see for sure.
So the way, the difference, if you were to implement this and everybody got on board, which I understand the elected officials by charter don't have to do, but if everybody got on board, then it's pretty simple. Everybody moves a step, you're done. If you do merit pay, somehow you substantiate an extra step or two based on performance. It's pretty straightforward. So there's no, yeah, that's how it is. So it removes a lot of the mystery, a lot of the negotiating between you and elected officials, department heads. There isn't any. The pay plan guides what happens by policy and by what's the pay plan, how it's set up. It should be a lot simpler process if everybody's on board.
Getting everybody on board is the problem. Do any people, any places, tie this step increase to the cost of living index to make it like an automatic COLA on these steps or not?
So right now, of course, I'll go back 6 months ago. Inflation was running about 3%. The cost of labor, if you look at the data about just the cost of labor, was moving about 3%. So cost of living and cost of labor are about the same. So you saw 3% pay increase budgets, everything, merit, COLA, general across the board, all increases, not promotions, but any general, all the increases were averaging about 3%. So COLA was in there. So my guidance to my clients is your pay increase budget should mirror 3%. That includes what everybody's doing for COLA. If inflation were to go to 5% and you have 2.35% steps, you're probably not going to go to 5% for your pay increase budget, but you might go to 3.5. So you'd have to add something to the steps that year to get you to the 3.5, whatever. I can remember in 80? Can't remember. We had 16% inflation. Nobody had pay increase budgets of 16%, 8% maybe. So I hate to use the word cost of living in talking to employees. I don't want them to think they can go to the newspaper and see the COLA number, say, I'm going to get that as an increase this year. No. Right now, that happens to be kind of the case, but if inflation were to go to 5, 6, 7, 8% or more, that's not going to be the case. So I don't want to even plant that seed. So I prefer to talk in terms of you're obligated to track the cost of labor and adjust the pay scales accordingly, periodically, to make sure you're doing that. And your annual increase each year should kind of mirror what's going on out there, so you keep pace.
So what happens if we get into an inflationary cycle the next 5 years? It averages on the employee scale 5%, and we're sitting here throwing 2.5 or 2.3.
So
we're still going to get behind. We're still
well,
gonna
it
have to
depends.
adjust it.
It depends what other employers are doing. If the other employers are giving 5% increases, and you're sitting at 2.35%, yeah, you're going to fall behind pretty quick. So that's why I say you have to track what's going on in the marketplace and make sure your total increase budget more or less tracks what's going on. So in that case, you would add 3.45, whatever the number is, to get to 5.
All right. So are we going to have to hire y'all every year to do this study for us so that we know whether or not we're
No. Yeah, so most of my clients, what we do is I suggest every 2 years, you, the client, take a look at it. You hire me or not, I don't care how you do it, but somebody needs to take a look at what's going on in the marketplace. If you hire me, what I would do is take a snapshot of, let's say, 10 or 12 jobs and pull the market numbers, market data, compare that to your current step 8s, and see where you are. And if your step eights are kind of low, I'd suggest, hey, you need to move the whole set of scales 1.7% or 2% or whatever it is to get your step eights up to market. Maybe do that every 2 years or so to kind of keep the pay plan current. So that's not a big project like what we're doing here. And you can kind of do it on your own. There's published survey data on what employers are doing for pay increase budgets. It's available out there if you look for it. And you just kind of pay attention.
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, HR can keep up with market studies, local pressures off. And we can keep up with that way, at least for a few years. We got to do something. You know, right now, if the inflation's 5 and we can do 2.5, that's better, it sounds like, than what we've done in the last 5 years from the question I just asked a few minutes ago. So we're going to have to figure out how to do something. I mean, all the counties around us is going to be growing. Nashville's stretching out. We've got to be able to keep good associates, good employees, good team members, partners working in the county with us one way or the other. So we got to figure out how to do something, whether it's this or whether it's performance-based. Even if it's performance-based, you can still approve a certain amount of a percentage increase against that salary that you have to pay out every month or for the year. We can have a percentage and we can figure it out from there, but we're not going to solve that tonight.
Problem with performance-based is so subjective. That's the problem with it. This is not subjective. This is fair to everyone across the board. So that's why I've always favored this approach over merit pay. Merit pay sounds good unless you're the one that gets looked over, and nobody can tell you why you were looked over, or will tell you why you were looked over. And I've been in both situations, and I think something like this is a fairer approach for our employees.
I would suggest you implement this first. Merit pay is a pretty big undertaking. It probably takes 3 years before you get it right. So is it worth it? You know, I grew up in the private sector, as I mentioned, and did a lot of pay for performance things with private sector organizations, big and small. I've done some performance management, performance merit pay based things with public sector organizations. It's tough. You have to have some measures almost finely tuned for each job family so that they make sense. One size fits all performance appraisal forms, kind of worthless if you ask me. So you always have to come up with how do we measure the performance of a sheriff deputy, water plant operator, sanitation driver, payroll clerk. That's tough. And I usually say, you know, if your objective is to improve the performance of the organization, it might be worth it. If your performance of your organization is okay, or you don't want to improve it, or don't know how to improve it, or don't know how to measure it, I think merit pay is maybe not the thing to jump on right away, but it's just a tough thing to do.
How did we get these two things, these two pieces of paper so far off from each other this quick? Then I guess I'm confused, because this is all about merit pay that we just talked about a week ago for, you know, based on performance, and this is totally not.
I can kind of address this, and Vicki, Renee kind of help me if I'm wrong on this. We have actually been in discussions to where these steps are not necessarily annual increases, but they are merit increases. That has been one discussion. I'm not saying that's an official, I'm not saying that's law, but the merit increases would be based on your steps, or your steps would be based on merit. Most of the departments are asking for annual evaluations of their employees. And that's where it becomes in the personnel handbook. And that's why that discussion was brought up. This is mainly a step to get us into some kind of organized fashion of how to get our pay situated.
So at a minimum, you know, if you could use the step-based plan, and you could do, like I say, 0, for the poor performers, and you might have 10% of the employees who fall in that category, maybe. And then most people would get 1 step, and then there'd be a handful that would get 2 steps. And that's kind of, and maybe a rare bird that would get 3, you know, that's a possibility. So you could do merit pay with this and kind of ease into it that way. No, because then you'll administratively it gets. Well, with a step-based plan, the idea is you have to land on a step. So if you do what you do, and all of a sudden you have 16 pay grades with 500 steps, you know, it becomes an administrative nightmare. So that's why you go to pay ranges. What you're describing, you can do with the pay ranges.
Got a question for the department heads in the back. Let's just go back, say, last 24 months. My question to the department heads, if you have lost any employees to another employer, can you think back to what geographical area that employee went to instead of being here in Trousdale? Does anybody had some employees change in the last 24 months? And if so, where'd they go? Nashville to Davidson. And the reason for them going to Nashville probably is pay.
Overall benefits, pay, no way we could be in that fire department.
Okay.
Realistic expectation that things were projected. Very competitive in this round.
Yeah, and to talk about the baseline just for a second, as I look at this study, we always want to be cognizant of the people that we compete against that are around us. And we've always said that we could not compete with Davidson County, or sometimes we can't compete with Lebanon. But we need to know what they're doing, because that's where our employees typically go, is to someone that touches us. Mm-hmm. But as I have looked at this, and as others have looked at this, there's been a question, for example, in your study, how much is this weighted where they went to Dixon, Tennessee? And Putnam County is Cookeville. And then there's Cumberland County. And then there's Bedford. All of those are much bigger than we are. So help me understand where it's almost like we're being measured against entities that have car dealerships, that have hotels to stay at, that have chain restaurants, which we have none of the 3. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to understand, as we compare the apple to the apple, are we, and that question has been asking me, as some, you know, that have seen the report, like, why are we being compared to, I understand why we're compared to the ones that touch us. Mm-hmm. But I was wondering why that some of those that don't touch us, and they're all bigger than we are. And how does that affect the formula, so to speak? Now, 2.3% cost of living, that's nationwide. I get that part. Mm-hmm. But can you kind of help me understand that part?
Sure. We talked at some length with the mayor about what benchmarks we should include. I think we decided pretty quickly not to include Metro Nashville because of it's so much larger and a lot more taxpayer dollars available. So we decided to leave that one out. But in talking to many department heads, they're losing people to Wilson, Sumner, Putnam, the city of Lebanon, Gallatin, Hendersonville is not in here, but so we kind of came up with a mix that we thought represented surrounding counties, but some that were a little bit further out, that may be a little bit bigger. Yeah, well, Trousdale County, if you get me wrong, is one of the smallest in the state, right? So,
well, Houston County,
well,
Moore County, Clay County. I'm just wondering, so because.
Yeah, some of those are so far out that, I didn't want to get away too far from Middle Tennessee. So like somebody made the comment that Nashville is, all the Nashville influence is heading this way. It's heading south. It's Spring Hill, Columbia used to be pretty much untouched. Cost of living almost indistinguishable between Columbia and Franklin. It's closing, the gap is narrowing. That's coming here, probably not too far out. So we're trying to balance what we think is reasonable in terms of where your people are going, what competitive offers they're looking at. They're not going to Clay County or, some of these other places. They are going to Wilson, Sumner, Putnam.
That's not really where I was questioning, though. I was questioning Cumberland, Bedford, Dixon.
So one of the challenges we have is availability of data. County governments are not always cooperative when it comes to filling out surveys. So we do have some larger in here. Cumberland County is larger, but it's also a little bit further out from the Middle Tennessee influence. So on the balance, that seemed okay. As I mentioned, employees don't care. They're looking at what they can get, and if it's in Wilson County or Sumner or Davidson, that's what you're up against.
Well, the things that I mentioned is we talk about the revenues, and I mentioned 3 components of revenue generation for a government entity. The car dealership, car dealerships, hotel, motels, chain restaurants, food and beverage.
Right.
Things that we are somewhat limited to that some of these others that I see in this category and others have mentioned too, like, I know those 3 components factor into Walmart. They factor into the generation of revenues that the county can use or has at its disposal. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dwight, and this is more of a budget and finance thing. That's why.
Sure.
What percentage does Jerry Ford always say that we always have? It's a taxpayer that travels against it, 38% or 43%, and a vast majority of our revenues are from the taxpayer itself. So we don't have the other factors to cling to generate revenues. And so that was sort of the questions as you do the bench line, you do the matrix of where's this figure going to fall? It's directly affected by all those that were in the study to start with. So that was just food for thought.
So my response to that is we were charged with coming up with a pay plan that would position the county city government to be competitive going forward. And so this is our answer. Now, usually what happens next is this. And we may get direction from the elected official, Steve, this is too much, we can't afford this. What can we do to scale it back? Can we implement it over 2 years? Can we slide it to the left a little bit? Those are all things you can do to accommodate issues related to revenues. But if you're asking me, if you're solely interested in attracting and retaining employees, forget about the revenue piece for now. I know you can't, but for now, let's forget about that. This is my recommendation of where you need to be. Now, you all figure out the revenue piece. And if that means we have to scale this back because we have to, we have to. But so like I say, I don't view this as set in concrete or by any means done. It's kind of our first salvo and we're now just getting feedback. And we may need to tweak things to make it fit, whether it's pay for performance or budget, whatever. That's the kind of guidance we need.
Well, I think we said earlier, it's a big gap between what we want to do, what we need to do, and what we can do. And it's reconciling that trifecta to come together with something that's workable. And there is a lot of moving parts to this that changed from the time you did this to now. I'm sure it's changed. But as far as figuring where we're at in the labor market, were you using the pay data from those counties that we were discussing, or were you just using job descriptions from those counties? Because that affects whether we're at 85% of what we should be, or 95% of what we should be, or 50% of what we should be. Is it? I just want to make sure that I'm clear that it wasn't just job descriptions that were compared, but it was actual rates of pay that came from Cumberland, that came from Bled, that came into this overall figure. Is that correct?
Yes. So what we did, we compared jobs here to jobs in these other employers based on job functions, not titles. So we try to make apples and apples comparisons as best we can. Now, in smaller counties, people wear multiple hats. It's not always easy, but we can usually make a pretty good match and figure out, and we don't ask for the pay scales. We want to know, what are you actually paying your people in Cumberland County, in Wilson County? I don't care what their pay scale says, because that's been part fiction. I want to know what they're actually being paid. So we match that, and that's our market rate for the job. So that's what these people doing these job functions, performing these job functions, are actually being paid right now in
But
these.
does that
in
take
those accounts.
into account longevity individually or just overall?
No, it's the law of large numbers. So we're assuming that if you look at all the pay rates that they're analyzed, that you're going to have across all these counties and cities, you're going to have some employees that are new, some have been there 20 years. And average it out, it's going to be kind of in the middle. If we only had 2 benchmark counties, I'd be afraid of that. But as long as we've got 11, it should kind of come out in the wash, so to speak.
I think I would feel better about some of these figures if it had more of the bottom feeders like us, Clay County and, upper Cumberland counties that have small population, small retail base, things of that nature, thrown into the mix. Not necessarily, that's all we look at,
Right,
but to kind of balance these bigger counties to get us more to a balance there.
Yeah.
I appreciate all you did. I know this is a monumental task, and I'm not trying to minimize it, and I'm certainly not trying to tell you that you did it wrong.
Right,
That is not what I'm saying.
right.
I just, in looking at the counties, I think we're going to get kickback from some of the other commissioners and the public when they look at the counties identified here, that everybody is above us. And I think that's, of course, just about everybody is above us, but I'm just saying in population at least. But
So there's 2 ways to handle that. One, we could go ask Upper Cumberland for data, which I'm telling you, it's probably not going to be forthcoming, because we ask them every year to participate in our survey, and I don't think they ever have. We could ask, or we can say subjectively, this set of benchmarks is kind of on the high end, so let's just shift our scales down 1 step, 2 steps. You decide. That probably makes more sense in many ways anyway. My guess is if we added a couple of those counties, it's going to change the numbers, 15 cents here, 10 cents there, 25 cents there. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference. Unless you throw out the Wilsons and the Sumners. If you throw those out, okay, now we're going to start making a difference. But I don't think we want to do that. So.
To leave in there, because that's where we lose.
Oh, yeah,
our
exactly, yeah,
employees too, if we do lose them.
Yeah.
I think it's good to have a benchmark that it's something to shoot for in the steps, and to talk about for just a second. I know we're kind of going round and round about this, but historically, to Mr. Davis's question, and to help Amy out a little bit here, when the commission has talked about pay increases in the past, and this is my 15th year, it's always been brought up. Well, okay, but we'd like to see a merit-based system implemented. And I even believe that to a degree it is there, but it's never been really implemented. And I think there's some backlash on some that have been on the court for a while that says, why do we keep doing this? And there's some pushback on raises in general, because well, we asked for this and it never did happen. So I think that's why you're seeing some of that, what you're talking about, but you're also seeing some of this too, where there's steps. So there's different ideas that are coming before us, which I think is a good thing. But that's I hope that answers kind of why you may see, and you're right, it says merit. Now we're saying step. What are we doing here? I think we may see maybe a blend in I don't know, but I know what she's talking about, because I've been here on those courts when those questions come up, and Mr. Jewell and I talked about that recently, about he was actually working a while back where they thought they had it implemented, and not everything was working as it should be. But I hope that helps.
No, it does. Thank you. It just sounds like we got some more fun conversations coming.
well, I think some of the questions we had tonight, some of the things, have we been involved with this on the beginning instead of the tail end, might have been answered before they got to here, but we weren't. And so we have a lot of questions. And I assure you, this body asks questions.
Let me give you an example. On that pay grade here, up to 15, right? Everybody don't get 15. I'll give you an example, right, the GS. GS is the federal government, and you got U.S. Postal Service. Everybody, like the employee, like a labor person, let it carry PS5. PS5, as far as they carry gold, but they get 26 steps. Anything over PS5, that's in the management area. So, and this diagram you got here, in other words, all the labor here in this county get up to 10 grade. Anything over 10 grade, it's management position.
In this pay plan here, the first level supervisors start in grade, I guess, 8. Jail, sergeant, first level supervisor in the jail is a grade 8. Let's see, there's no supervisors in grade 7. Library director. Library pay is a whole nother story in the state of Tennessee. But generally speaking, your supervisory jobs are starting in grades 8 and 9.
I think that this is a good benchmark to be looked. And again, I kind of wish we'd had a joint meeting with the budget and finance, because a lot of the things that came up tonight are really budgetary things. And we do not have, this is not like it's 3 weeks now, I gotta make a decision, because our budget has already been passed for the year. And what we're doing now will in some way affect the budget that's coming down the road. We probably start working on that in March or April. But we already have some ideas and some things I've heard tonight that are going to help us to, like Dwight had mentioned some others about, hey, there our growth revenues that come in, if that is a constant that we hope continues, that can help supplement some of this stuff. I don't know that this is going to be its final form. I don't know that we may use more steps than we do merit, probably, if I were guessing, but it may be a blend of things at the end of the day. I talked to a lot of people in the market right now, and they're getting paid bonuses if they show up to work enough days out of the year, that they don't call out sick. There's an extra little incentive package that if you do these things, these metrics, then you're going to get a little something. So I'm not so sure that we won't see a blending, but at least this gives us some guidelines to now we know some parameters. It may not be perfect, but it's enough that gives us enough data that we can start to build on it, to make it molded the way we need it here in Trousdale County with what we have, that we can work with.
Anything else?
Well, we were down to, and we may have to call it the evening for now. And again, we may have to call you back for budget and finance, but we did not get a chance to talk about benefits tonight. But were you going to talk about that very much, or do you need it for another session?
Generally speaking, the big problem we identified with benefits was the family coverage, employee contribution towards family coverage. It's a big problem. And having managed benefits for Dollar General and big corporation, I know that corporations and employers in general are trying to figure out how to get by with paying less for benefits. And the more we can keep our benefits costs down, the better off we are. One strategy is to keep the spouses and the families off our benefits plan. So what you do is you have high premium payments for family coverage. The spouses and families aren't on your plan, your costs are more reasonable. Now, that's a great cost containment strategy for benefits costs, but not so good for employee relations. So that's what we found in feedback from the focus groups, department heads, our own comparison of the data, your employee contribution towards family coverage is pretty high.
And you know, when it comes to benefits for the employee, that's a pre-tax deduction too, so it can really help them out at the end of the day if it's worked right, or if the availability of the right coverage is there. I know
Yeah.
that the employer, or in this case, us as the government entity, would cost more, and the premiums are going up with the insurance as they
Yeah.
have been. But I think we're lacking very much so in that area personally,
Mhm.
that we should try to sometimes focus on some of the benefits that we have for the employees and try to make them better, because it's a double advantage for them, a better benefit and a tax, benefit as well. So just food for thought, and I knew we were going to be short on our benefits.
Yeah, other than that, I think the benefits were pretty good. I think one of the deficiencies we identified, if you think you already corrected, so was it vacations or holidays? Remember? Vacation, you did fix that a little bit, so I think the healthcare thing was the big one.
So as we go through this and talk a little bit more on personnel, we're gonna really quickly find ourselves in budget and finance. And I don't know if we need to do a joint session on this. I'm not sure what our next step would be, but we probably need to get with Mayor Chambers and then try to figure out a game plan from here as to when we could have you back and talk about some of these a little bit more and maybe scale down.
The benefits part of it's a lot easier to understand maybe than this step concept. I think the way you've got it laid out in there, it's pretty easy, at least for me to read that and understand what you're suggesting on that. So I don't think that we would be accomplishing a lot by trying to go over that tonight, as late as it is.
Yeah.
I'm an old man and I need my sleep.
Any comments from the public before we adjourn for the evening? Anybody else got a question? Department head, other commissioners, newspaper guy, Mr. Buckmaster.
So if I understand this correctly, we're going to put our employees in the STEP program at the step closest to their current pay. And then we're going to give them 2.35% per year. Is that right?
That's what this proposal.
So the whole reason for requesting this proposal in my mind was not only the discrepancy in pay between jobs between our county and other counties, but also the discrepancy in pay between our employees who are doing the same job, which this doesn't address either one of them in my mind. I'm sure every other county is given roughly 2.35% raises every year. So we're never going to catch them with this plan, nor are we going to fix the discrepancy in the pay between our own employees. We haven't addressed either one of those. So this plan does nothing for me except keep us behind everybody we compared ourselves to, just as far behind as we are right now.
Well, it's not completely true, because there are a fair number of employees who are below this phase-in step. They're going to get big increases to get to the bottom of the range, so to the bottom steps. So there are some corrections being made in this plan. It's not everybody's going to go, there are some going to get more than 2.35% twice. They're going to get more than 2.35% to get to the closest step, and they're going to get that 2.35. So there is some catch up, but you're right. I mentioned that normally, well, not sometimes, we'll take the opportunity when we do these plans to do what you suggest, look at time and job, and figure out some formula that we can apply across the whole county that gets paid closer, maybe not exactly where it should be, but a lot closer, largely depending on how many dollars you have to do that. So that's kind of a next step off into phase 2 of these kind of plans. So we've only addressed phase 1. You're right.
If there's no other comments, questions, take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Davis. Second. All in favor, say aye.
We're adjourned.